My name is Ted Goldwyn. I am a writer for financial services, and I'm really selling it right here in the title of my presentation here, Writing for Financial Services, a lucrative and exciting opportunity. We'll see if everybody agrees at the end of this. But yeah, once again, Sarah, I really appreciate the opportunity. Thanks for having me on. I've been blown away by the other guests that you've had on today. I've met and known several of you, with the exception of Mindy, first time meeting her today, but she blew me away. And if she doesn't already, I think she should host her own podcast on some of the topics she discussed, because she was a ball of energy and had some great insights. Today, in the 25 minutes that I have, really want to talk through the opportunity in writing for FinServ, discuss some of the keys to writing effective B2B content in this niche, talk about some of the trends in the space, a couple of red flags, things to watch out for. And I do have some links to some resources at the end as well. Sarah, I hope covering most of the questions you've been asking. Thanks for sharing those in advance. But also, as we go along, if you or the audience has any questions, feel free to jump right in. This doesn't have to be formal by any means. Okay, a little bit about my story, just to kick things off. I had almost 2 decades of working in this space, in financial services, specifically in the banking industry, ranging from a top 15 asset bank holding company to a mid to large size credit union in a variety of different roles: retail branch banking, commercial lending, product management, marketing, small business services, compliance, payments, and credit union operations, which differed to a certain extent from commercial banking operations. So I did that for a while, and then I jumped, like many of us on the call today, I jumped out and started my freelance writing journey back in November of 2014, just over 7 years ago. And today I work with companies in the financial services sector that sell high value products and services to banks and credit unions. So it's really that true B2B type of niche. And we'll talk a little bit more about that as we go along. How I work, I think very similar to a lot of the other folks you've had on today. Primarily long form thought leadership is what I write. White papers, ebooks, research reports, bylined articles, some blogging as well. For me, the niche includes, or the clients that I work for include FinTech, financial technology, payments, consulting firms, QSOs, which is an acronym for Credit Union Service Organizations. It's a very unique little sub niche. And then very occasionally, I'll work directly with banks or credit unions, but that tends to be a little bit more B2C and B2B. I don't do much of that type of work. I did want to note that I don't do much in wealth strategies, investment advisory, asset management, which is a massive subsector of financial services unto its own. There are a lot of great writers out there that specialize in that area based on their background and expertise. I've done a little bit, not much to really write home about. And then in terms of the folks who I interact with at the client level, they range from, for the smaller clients, they may be the chief marketing officer. More typically, it's your marketing directors and your content marketing managers at the client firms, particularly if they have pretty decent sized marketing departments. And then for me, why did I choose financial services? It may be obvious from the previous slides, but with my background in the industry, it just seemed like a natural fit. And it was the easiest way to jump into writing when I decided to leave the corporate world 7 years ago. And I was quickly able to leverage my industry contacts, my experience, my knowledge to pick up a couple of anchor clients pretty quickly in the banking and fintech space. And for me, that was crucial because, a little different from Mindy with her journalism background, I really had no professional writing or journalism experience. I came at it from the other end, from the operational corporate side of working in the industry. And I had this love for writing, a love for marketing. And for years, I was looking for a way to really scratch that itch. And when I decided that after 25 years out in the corporate world, it really wasn't for me anymore, I jumped in feet first, and it seemed like financial services was the way to go. Plus, I had a love for the space. I was in it for 20 years. I didn't enjoy the dressing up in a suit and tie and doing the whole corporate rat race, but I really did love the industry, and particularly the credit union industry. I worked on that side for almost 9 years and developed a real passion for the people working in the industry and the members that we served and that type of thing. So it seemed like the right decision at the time. Since then, I've stuck with financial services because I'm still very comfortable there, and I've been able to expand and develop my subject matter expertise in the area. It is, as we'll get into, among the more lucrative sectors of B2B content writing and marketing. And I have absolutely amazing and wonderful clients who I work with every day. They are super professional, they're easy to work with, and they're generally really good people. And they value what I do. They value writers, they value, most importantly, content marketing and how it helps the business. So it's been a wonderful experience there. Okay, enough about me. Why are we here? We're here to talk about the industry sector, the niche, and why it may be a good choice for a lot of people on this call, I hope. Share a little bit about the opportunity. The global financial services market is absolutely massive, over $22 trillion in value. In the US alone, which is the largest piece of that market, it's estimated at almost $5 trillion in annual revenues. A lot of opportunity there. If they could throw a few $1,000s our way for writing a white paper, I think they could probably afford. The global FinTech market, financial technology market, was valued at over $7 trillion in 2020. And that is a rapidly growing segment of the industry. In the US, when you look at financial institutions, and again, the portion of financial services I write for typically is centered around financial institutions in the US. There's about 5,000 commercial banks and a little over 5,000 credit unions in the US. That number is falling. There's been a lot of consolidation in the industry over the last 3 decades, but I wouldn't let that scare anybody, because with that consolidation, the banks and the credit unions on average are getting bigger. Industry asset sizes are growing, but the number of players are falling. And 10,755 FinTech startups in the Americas at last count. And then the global payments industry. Payments is a piece of what I do, a pretty significant piece of the clients I work for. A little harder to nail down the numbers there, but anywhere from 500 billion to 1.5 trillion is the size of that market in terms of revenues, and also a growing piece. So I know, Sarah, you've been asking a lot about what does it take to succeed? What are clients looking for in terms of the traits of successful writers? This got talked about a lot today by a lot of the speakers. Industry expertise and experience. And this is how I got in. That's how I got into this. That's how I was able to start my writing career, is by leveraging the expertise and experience I had. That's one way to jump into any niche. And it served me very well. However, as several of the other folks have discussed, that's not the only way to get into any niche. And if you have a real passion or interest in finance or financial services or financial institutions, and any experience at all, I encourage you to go for it. This was the path of least resistance for me. I know a lot of people have gotten into this type of writing for financial services firms without having that same level of experience. And really, the experience is most important to get that first client. Once you're able to get a few samples in your portfolio and you start feeling comfortable even speaking to prospects, it becomes a lot easier as time goes on. And it was funny because listening to the other speakers, I didn't think about this beforehand, but I've actually done a little bit of writing in all the niches we've discussed here today. Retail, I've done a couple of pieces on things like retail shrink and stuff like that for clients that are consulting firms that I started out with them doing some writing on financial services. And they said, hey, could you write about this? Can you write about that? And I'm, oh yeah, I worked in retail 25 years ago for a few years. Things have changed, but I think I could speak intelligently about that. HR, I've had a couple of clients in the HR space. Don't know much about it except from working in the corporate world. Insurance is a piece of financial services, not a piece that I have a lot of experience or background in. I've written on that topic from time to time as well. Yeah, I don't let the experience piece hold you back. It's one way to get started. It serves as a good crutch in the beginning and a way to get your foot in the door, but it's not the only way. Some other traits, very similar to other industries: professionalism, being on time for calls and meetings, and always hitting your deadlines. The one thing I will mention about professionalism in financial services, there is a reputation in the finance industry, financial institutions, banking specifically, that it is very buttoned down and very suit and tie, and be 15 minutes early for a meeting and speak very formally and things like that. And when I started in the industry years ago, it was definitely very like that. Things have relaxed a bit over time. And as writers, we're working primarily with marketing directors and marketing managers, which regardless of the industry or the niche, they tend to be a little bit more relaxed and easygoing and more casual and easy to deal with. So I certainly have found that in this niche as well. But I think no matter, what market you go into, as you move up the scale to larger firms, you're going to want to present yourself in a professional way. And it really comes down to how you deliver and delivering on time and going above and beyond and doing what's expected. Attention to detail is super important in this niche. There's a lot of complex topics. There's a lot of fast moving trends and changes in the industry. It's important to really stay on top of those trends and have attention to detail in the writing and make sure you're writing intelligently about it. And then lastly, avoid the industry jargon. There's a lot of it. There's a lot of people that speak in acronyms. When you speak with subject matter experts, they're going to be talking very inside baseball. They're going to use a lot of acronyms and a lot of insider jargon. Your job, my job as the writer, is to really interpret that for a broader audience in many cases. So very important to try to avoid that jargon at all costs. And Sarah, if you have any questions as we go along, or if you see any questions come through the chat, please don't hesitate to jump in and interrupt.
It's really interesting, your observation about professionalism, because what comes to mind for me is in banking and FinTech, they're systematic and orderly, that if you were a no-show for a call, for example, that would have consequences, I think, with a banking client. Yep. But if you had to cancel last minute for somebody in HR or retail or digital marketing, to me, because they deal with so many different kinds of emergencies and they're just flying by the seat of their pants most of the time, it wouldn't be, it's not good. You need to be professional, but it wouldn't be the emergency, I think, that it would be with a banking client. That subtle difference is really interesting as far as who you like to work with, like people who are very systematic and maybe process oriented versus people who are just doing their best under hectic circumstances.
Yeah, I do think it's changing quite a bit. And again, the folks that I'm dealing with on a day-to-day basis are the marketers. And in this age of Zoom and the new normal, people are much more open and flexible. And we're all calling in from our homes or wherever we are. And it's much more accepted now. What's interesting is I do have a few clients that are consulting firms that do work in the financial services industry, and those tend to be much more buttoned down still. So you're dealing with that whole consulting sector still seems to be pretty hung up on the professionalism aspect. And I've had my clients remind me, make sure you're on time for the call, and we'll be listening in the first time when I've done some interviews with their clients and things like that. There's always got concern. Largely across the industry, I think it's relaxing quite a bit. Great. Yeah, speaking of that, the typical profile of the client, the marketing executive on the client side who may be looking to hire you to write for them. As I mentioned, for me, it ranges from that mid-level content marketing manager on up to the chief marketing officer, usually if it's a smaller organization. Across the board, they are overworked and stretched thin right now. And I suspect that's very similar across industries, but definitely in financial services and FinTech, it's endemic right now. And that's something that's just been accelerating over the past couple of years. They are expected to put out a steady stream of content, both sales-focused type copy, as well as thought leadership content, as well as social media posts and all the rest. And a lot of times they're responsible for all of that. The pandemic certainly made their jobs much more difficult. And what's interesting is there's been a lot of churn in the industry on the marketing side, as I think we're seeing across the board. Early on last year, through the summer and fall, several of the marketers that I work with, they lost their jobs. There were some places that were downsizing and they laid some people off. Interestingly, this year, it's been more of that great resignation. In fact, and one good client of mine, one of my anchor clients, they had 3 of my primary or secondary contacts who left in the last I don't know, 9 months, or two of them to go become freelancers, as a matter of fact, and one to go on into the nonprofit sector. So she left the sector completely. Just a lot of churn. It's leaving less people in those spots and more of a demand and for hiring outside resources. It leads me to my last bullet here. There's an increasing trend towards outsourcing. And what's interesting about that is, yeah, they're outsourcing a lot of the writing, but recently I've seen, several firms that have just taken on as clients are outsourcing the entire marketing function. So they have a couple of these places, they've brought in fractional CMOs to really help them get their branding in place, get their content marketing strategy, establish a voice for the brand, because they were really struggling with that. And then those folks, those contract marketers that they're hiring, then they need help with the writing, and they're reaching out to people like us. And then another thing that I've seen quite a bit in this space is that often, even at larger companies, larger FinTechs, and they don't have sufficient domain expertise among their in-house marketing staff. They may have 6 or a dozen or a few dozen people in marketing, but they're more, generalists. They may be graphic designers, or they may be social media experts, but they don't have that expertise in financial services. So again, it goes back to a conversation about expertise. You may not need a lot to break in, because the people on the inside, they don't even know what they don't know necessarily. If you're someone who say, hey, I've written a white paper, I've written some blog posts on trends in financial services, that might be enough for them to give you a look. Sarah, I know you've asked about red flags and some things to look out for with a potential client that may be interested in hiring you. And this came up earlier. They don't know what they need. They don't have a strategy. They don't know what they're looking for. They've just been charged with, hey, we got to get some content out there. We need somebody to write it, and just go get anybody. That's not a recipe for success. And that's not a recipe for us to enjoy working with that client. I would definitely, as part of your discovery and introductory conversations with these people, these are the type of questions to ask. Ask them about their content strategy. Ask them what they're planning for this coming year. Ask them what type of content they've done in the past and how they've resourced that. Do they follow trends in the market? Things like that can be very revelatory in terms of whether they're going to be the right client for you. Poor understanding of their own firm's value proposition. If you have to really pull that out of them, what makes your company and your offerings different from what everybody else is offering out there? If they can't articulate that, that's a pretty serious red flag as well. And then these last two these come out of horror stories that I've experienced firsthand. And the first one, writing by committee, that's actually with a client. It was a really bad experience. They've turned into a much better client over time. And I've done a lot of work with them, but this was a couple of years ago when I was first starting out with them. And they wanted to produce this 50-page report on a certain trendy topic. And there were literally a dozen people involved in this. And there were weekly meetings where we all got together and we were parsing every line of a page of the report. And this went on for months, and it was absolutely painful. And in that case, they were paying me by the hour. I never get paid by the hour, but I had a feeling about this project and the scope was very undefined. I said, yeah, let's do an hourly rate on this one. I'm glad I did. It's the only time I've been glad to get paid by the hour. And then the kicker is 4 months later, after this got bandied about and destroyed and beaten to death, they ended up producing basically a slideshow, like a 10-page slide deck. And that was the result of all those hours of many people's time. That was horrible. And then same type of thing, if you have too many reviewers and editors, that's a question I always try to ask in discovery is, how many people do we need to run this by before it gets approved and published on your side? And if they're like, 5 or 6 people and it goes to the CEO and he has to approve it, that project isn't going to be done for months and it's going to look very different than the initial draft that you wrote. That could create a very painful experience as well. Always get paid up front, or at least get 50% paid up front is a good piece of advice on that too. The cons of writing in financial services, I had to rack my brain about this because I love it. And I really don't think there are a lot of cons, but certainly you want to know what you're getting into before you start writing for this space. Look before you leap. I do feel it's to your benefit to have a good basic understanding of how banking, payments, financial technology, works, or at least some of the trends that are out there right now, at least in sort of layman's language, being able to speak to it conversationally, even if you don't have a background in the space. Some other things to watch out for, though, is that it can be very insular, it can be very inside baseball, and some segments of the sector can be unwelcoming to outsiders. And I'll give you some examples of that. So I worked for a long time in the credit union space, and I still do a lot of writing for the credit union space or targeted at a credit union audience. And I love it because I grew up in it to a certain extent. But the terminology is different from banking. It is very different from when you talk about members, you don't talk about customers, you talk about cooperative, you talk about collaborations. There's a lot of things where if you're not in the know or in the industry, you might be treated as an outsider if you use the wrong terminology. So just something to watch out for. Farm credit is very similar to that. And if you're not interested in financial services, it can be boring. I'll admit that. I think it's very exciting, but it can be boring. You do need to have a certain amount of passion for it if you're going to, be in it for the long term. It is fast moving. You do need to stay on top of trends. Banking never used to be fast moving. Back in the old days, it used to be certainly like retail banking, commercial banking was a backwater, not with financial technology, not with digital payments, the digital transformation, all these different things going on. It is changing rapidly right now, and you have many new entrants into the space and new ways of people doing their personal and business finance that you really need to stay on top. And that goes for compliance and regulation as well. It's a highly regulated industry, and the compliance aspects are very rigorous and they're constantly changing. Lastly, there is some negative perception around the industry as well, especially a number of the big retail banks have gotten really bad press over the past decade or so. It's bottom line focus. It's a money focused business. That's what it's all about. If you, as a writer, are a mission or cause-driven writer, this may not be the sector for you. You may not be comfortable writing for it. How are we doing on time here, Sarah?
This list is beautiful. Time has ceased to exist for me. This will be our last live one for today, and the other two are pre-recorded to send out. I'm happy to have you as long as you're able.
Okay, great. Just have a few more slides to go here. Yeah, so I really racked my brain around this one. What's great about this niche is that there is a lot to write about, and especially right now, it's the glory days of financial services in terms of the new technologies, the new players. As I mentioned, some of these other things we talked about earlier, but digital transformation, that's big, any industry that you're in, but no more financial services. Payments as a subsector of that, digitization of payments is huge right now. And we saw that increase exponentially during the pandemic as people were staying at home. They weren't going into stores. Everybody's buying online now, or they're using different form factors to make their purchases and do their spending. Even if they're not going online and doing it on Amazon, they're doing payments through their phones. They're using digital wallets. They're using Venmo for P2P payments. So there's all these different ways to pay, and it's all in the digital ecosphere. Mergers and acquisitions and ongoing industry consolidation. I mentioned up front how the industry has consolidated greatly over the past few decades, and that's only accelerating right now. So it's an evergreen topic. Same with regulatory compliance. That's up and down. Depends on what administration we have in Washington or at the state level. There are some hot regulatory periods, and then there are some where regulations get relaxed a little bit. Right now, one of the big ones in the regulatory arena is CECL, which is the current expected credit loss accounting standard, which is in the process of being implemented depending on the size of the financial institution or the size of the organization, or whether they're publicly traded. But that is huge. If you do any work in the accounting industry, you've probably been talking about that for a long time, but in financial services as a really hot topic as well. Cognitive technologies like AI, machine learning, robotic process automation is big, as it is in many industries. Credit union specific topics I write a lot about. Buy now, pay later. That goes back to some of these new form factors of the way people are spending and buying online and picking up in store as well. Embedded finance is another big jargony term that's being bandied about as well. Real-time payments and open banking, they've been hot for a while and moving faster in Europe than here in the Americas, but they're coming to these shores as well. Data security, cybersecurity, and fraud. another set of evergreen topics. Customer experience, again, fits in with digitization and some of these other topics we talked about. And then operational efficiency ratios, return on investment, some of those more finance related CFO type topics, really important in this space. So here, efficiency ratios talked about a lot in the C-suite.
I just want to bask in the glory of this list for a little while, because this is beautiful.
We'll send it out after, Sarah.
And I think a couple things come to mind. So for me, I don't have professional experience in banking, but I worked my way in backwards because I did have experience writing about customer experience, and the digital customer experience for banks is enormous. I've also written about tax automation, because once you understand how automation works, then you just interview people about taxes and you combine that for yourself. Nathan says he just printed and taped this list into his notebook. Fantastic. And I just want to say, if any of this is making your eyes glaze over a little bit, number one, when you get hired to write about this kind of stuff, you're spending 5 to 10 hours just reading and just filling in this background information that you don't have right now. So if none of these words are familiar, that's not a sign this isn't a good niche for you. It's just a sign there's a lot of reading to do. And then second, you could be very interested in any of these things for a couple $1,000s, right? Because for me, open banking, I probably wouldn't read about that in my personal time. But when we start talking about a $5,000 or $6,000 white paper, I could get really interested in that and how that affects like the rest of the world, and interviewing a couple people about what they know about that. That's how it all fits together. There's an incentive to learn about this stuff. Then once you start to learn the language, it gets more interesting. And then suddenly, whoa, you're a FinServ writer. And that's pretty cool.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and to bring some perspective to that, Sarah, 7 years ago when I got started writing for this sector, even though I had been in the sector working for a while, there were only about 4 or 5 of these topics that I was familiar with in any way. You develop that expertise over time. What's nice about having a list like this in your head when you get on a call with a client or with a prospect, though, is for that question that comes up, what do you see that's trending in the industry? Or what are you writing about? What are other people writing about? What have you seen out there? It's good to have a couple of these handy and ready to go. Oh yeah, buy now, pay later. That's a really hot topic right now. Maybe we should write something about that. And then you're able to pitch your client and get that first assignment, but also get future assignment.
And just to rock everybody's world again, a single banking institution or financial institution might want to write about all of that. And then every single thing on that list represents 10 to 20 startups or other companies who have an app or a product or something that they're trying to get into those banking institutions too. So what we just saw was really a list of 150 different places to prospect once you learn what those things are about.
Yeah, again,
So cool.
and the clients I work for, I rarely work for the banks and credit unions themselves, but I work for the providers of a lot of this stuff, or the providers that this type of thing is really important to them and to their clients. So it's providers of loan operating software, providers of could be HR software, it's consultants, it's compliance and regulatory consultants. It's all kinds of different things. The people who work with the commercial lending department on processing their documentation or helping them with the closing aspect. So there's many, like you said, every banking institution has dozens of vendors that they use to help them provide the services to their customers. And that's the rich market, is to go after those folks who provide those services to them. Real quick, talk about pricing a little bit here. As I mentioned, I charge by the project. I really don't do by the hour, by the word. I think no matter what niche you're in, that's definitely the way to go. That allows you to increase your revenues over time. It does depend on expertise and experience, how long you've been in the industry. In the beginning, I was writing quite a bit for industry publications as a way to get my byline out there and get a foot in the door and get a little bit of publicity for myself. They'll pay maybe 50 cents a word for a 1,000 word or 2,000 word feature article, that type of thing. The higher end, once you have a few years of experience in, a nice portfolio, 1,000 and up for ghostwritten articles, 750 on up for blogs, 4,000 to 6,000 for white papers, over $2,000 for case studies. Those are just some typical ranges that you can expect. We'll send this presentation out, but here's some resources for you guys. These are some of the go-to websites I'll go to industry sites that have great information, help you keep up on trends. Financial Brand is awesome. They put out some great thought leadership, very opinionated content. Some of these other ones are banking or credit union focused. Callahan and Associates they're a provider of software and consulting services for credit unions, but they have a really nice site where they publish a lot of articles. I used to do a little bit of writing for them. And then some of your more consulting firms like Mercator and Payments, they do really good stuff. And then this payments website, they publish a lot of articles as well. And then also here are a few recent Outlook reports I just cut and pasted into here, as well as a couple of things that had some good advice about writing content marketing for financial services. A little dated perhaps, but some good advice in there.
I think the theme that came up in the chat is just the opportunity out there. I think that's why B2B still gives me glassy eyes, because there are hundreds of thousands of businesses. All of them need to sell their products. That's what keeps them in business. And very few of them have all the writers that they need. It's just the hard part is figuring out what you want to write about and what you will enjoy writing about, because whatever you could possibly enjoy writing about, there is a niche for that. And it's just wonderful. I love it. I think I did want to dig into a little bit, maybe just an overview for all of the niches, because you mentioned in FinTech and banking finances, it is all about the money. But when it comes to why you should use a product, what you're writing about, what the case studies are about, it often comes back to financial gain, like the return on investment. Whereas in some other niches, maybe like HR and higher ed, it's more about saving costs and putting your resources to better use and more efficiency focused. So just as a note for everyone, that can change depending on your niche. If you have a certain passion about making people money or saving them money, that could also guide your decision on where to and what to write about.
Yeah, and I definitely think that's true. It's a very money-focused business, and it's about people's finances and their money, which is such an important aspect of our lives and enables us to do great things. But as I mentioned earlier, there are some sub-segments of the market, and I'll use credit unions as an example because I have such a passion for credit unions. Credit unions are nonprofit organizations. They're about really bettering the lives of their members, their member owners who own the credit unions. So it's really it's not such a profit motive in the credit union industry. Now, those companies that are providing credit unions with their technology, they tend to be profit oriented businesses. Those will be your clients, but still you want to keep that mindset in mind as you're writing for credit unions. That's not just about money.
As a side note, if you enjoyed our conversation today, I want to encourage you to check out the B2B Writing Career Kickstarter. This is the all-in-one class that introduces you to B2B, helps you figure out your niche, and then a couple times a year, we actually get together and write your first clips together. If you'd like more information about that, just click the link in the course below or head to b2bwritinginstitute.com. Thanks for joining.